The year was 1983. This building behind me was under construction. MTV had a stronghold on popular culture. Synth pop music by groups like Duran or the Eurythmics filled the radio waves. That was exactly 40 years ago. I've noted in other videos that right around when buildings turn this age, they seem to be about as ugly and detestable as they will ever be. It's like we have a collective blind spot that moves with us like a wake behind a speedboat or a shadow permanently cast behind us 40 years long. There's just something about the cycle of architectural design trends coupled with the lifespan of materials and building systems that goes into this. Those cycles magically overlap the bottom to render structures and spaces like this especially dated and beyond reasonable repair. To be honest though, designs from 1983 might be a little bit difficult to like just by their nature. Many designs from then were intentionally rebellious and challenging authority. But trust me on this 40-year thing. I mean, Frank Lloyd Wright's Larkin building was exactly 40 years old when the Larkin company moved out and the building was demolished 4 years later. Can you imagine bulldozing one of Frank Lloyd Wright's most iconic designs because it was too expensive to upgrade its air conditioning? So when we're at this stage and it's critically important, how can we like and appreciate stuff from 1983 when it looks like this? 1983 was the early days of a burgeoning new aesthetic that would eventually define the rest of the decade. Some pin the origin on this aesthetic to a cadre of designers that called themselves the Memphis Group. They had recently dropped a furniture collection in Milan that ravaged the design world. People either loved it or hated it, but either way, they were shocked by it. Its influence soon outgrew the galleries of elite design houses and made its way into almost every crevice of 80s culture. The group's members included designers of all sorts, graphic or industrial, as well as a few architects like Michael Graves and Ettore Sottsass. Together, they helped establish the look of the postmodernist design governing the 80s. The designs of the Memphis Group consciously and boldly broke the established rules of good design and taste. Ignoring those dictums that we learned from people like Dieter Rams or Mies van der Rohe that reinforce simplicity and the elimination of extraneous details. Less is more, Mies would say. For the Memphis Group, objects and buildings had a life, a story, and a soul. That soul was found in cheap, ubiquitous materials that you'd see in stuff that was deemed outdated at the time, like Formica countertops. It's no coincidence the laminate that Formica made was popularized in homes across the US almost exactly 40 years before the Memphis Group reappropriated it, so it was definitely not cool. The Memphis Group willfully used simplistic patterns for no apparent reason. Each piece was composed of independent elements that didn't look like they belonged together. They had discordant color combinations and textures, shiny with rough, hard things with soft things. Simple geometric forms like spheres and boxes were just stuck together without clear compositional rules and then called a chair that maybe you could just, sit on. Interestingly, to me at least, the foundations of that movement began years earlier with people like Robert Venturi and his declaration for liking complexity and contradiction in buildings. Much of this aesthetic of this area came from architecture originally and then spread from there. Just look at these glasses that were designed by the architect Hans Hollein. He famously declared that everything was architecture, and while they look super 80s, they were actually designed in 1973. All of these bad decisions allowed us to re-examine our preconceptions and expectations about how the world had been working, but also to envision how else it could work. They prompted us to find unexpected beauty in the unfamiliar configurations of familiar materials and shapes. Maybe then you could take this appreciation back with you to that Formica kitchen in your house that you've been meaning to renovate, and now maybe it doesn't look so bad anymore. All of this is a little uncomfortable at first. This chair, for instance, doesn't look like a chair. But all its parts are pretty easy to recognize. A green cylinder, a red quarter circle, an orange sphere. It certainly doesn't look cozy or comfortable. Just to drive their point home even further, each object in the Memphis Group's debut collection was named for a fancy hotel. This is the Bel Air chair, the Carlton divider, and so on. Of course, their influence can be readily seen in the aesthetic of MTV, who also embraced a youthfully rebellious attitude in the music and videos that it showed, as well as its branding.
You're watching MTV, music television, all day, all night, all video music.
So it was a natural fit. But the success of it meant it found its way into other places as well. Taco Bell's, Esprit, Saved by the Bell's Max coffee shop. And like any movement motivated by rebellion, once it becomes the status quo, it loses its edge, and it begins to represent the establishment instead of the rebels. But within the window of popularity of that aesthetic, this building was designed and constructed. It's now known as the Thompson Center, but then it was the State of Illinois building. It's big, it's colorful, it has a crazy round shape and funny detail. It should be pretty easy to see how the Memphis Group influenced its design, or if their stuff wasn't directly an influence in the strictest sense, you can at least see how its architect, Helmut Jahn, had similar motivations. For one thing, the building is intentionally made of materials that aren't that fancy, just stuff that you'd find anywhere in the city. And by using these, it elevates their status so that we can appreciate their qualities that they offer. The building is mostly just glass, mullion extrusions, and colored panels. The simple palette is about allowing you to experience transparency and reflection. And as a government building, you'd think that it would be made of something like solid marble, with maybe a giant dome on top and a staircase out in front marking out its importance. In some ways, this embrace of mundane materials here is the same as using laminate for a chair named after a fancy hotel. And that dome that you'd normally find on a government building, well, it's here, it's just cut off. And the monumental stair isn't on the outside either, it's actually facing inward toward the center. The building has the same parts that we'd expect for the kind of structure that it is, just in a different place and order, just like that Memphis furniture. Then you have things like the collisions of simple volumes and forms, you have the crazy colors, and so on. And true to the 40-year cycle prediction, this building is one of the most contentious conversations in preservation right now. I made a video about it a little while ago, but the gist is that the building was too expensive for the state to maintain, so they sold it and it's currently being renovated. And there's a lot of questions around the building's future, like how many of the design features that embody those 80s ideas will be kept around. The unfortunate answer is that probably won't be much. These are the renderings that they released. Ew. But that's all happening in opposition to some folks that fought really hard to get this building on the National Registry of Historic Places. There's even movies about this that you can check out. It's called Starship Chicago. I'm actually in the sequel, Starship Chicago 2. Anyway, one of the folks at the heart of that fight is Jonathan Solomon.
I first encountered the building as a child in 1985 when it opened.
And so today, 5,000 citizens jammed the 17-story atrium rotunda as the building was formally dedicated.
I began advocating for preservation of the Thompson Center, and that project became the kind of foundation of our firm, Preservation Futures, with my business partner, Elizabeth Blashes, which is explicitly looking at, among other things, the preservation of the very recent past. The challenge to preserving postmodern buildings is convincing culture generally that they're worthwhile and worth saving.
In his personal life, he also often finds himself celebrating design from the 80s through collections. But it's more than just a nostalgia for things from that era. The kind of thinking the Memphis Group was engaged in, challenging the status quo by embracing things overlooked by tastemakers, has value way beyond preserving stuff from the 80s. And that's exactly the kind of thinking that went into the unique renovation of this house that he worked on as a collaboration with his similarly 80s-minded wife, Meg Gustafson.
We really wanted pink in here, and I love a pink and red combination.
And architect Kiefer Dunn.
We wanted a house that would take use and patina and age and dirt, right? And not look old and dirty and
Modernism is very stressful.
Yeah.
It's very hard to keep clean.
It is.
We wanted history to add 80s to, instead of a blank box, which I find really hard to decorate.
Preservation traditionally has really valued what they call a period of significance, a specific time period when a property was considered to be valuable. And the work of a restoration architect, and often the work of a preservationist, is to find that period and bring a property back to the state it was in at that time and then hold it there, freeze it there. And we really see the work of design and the work of preservation as something different, that preservation of a property or space has to incorporate the past, the full past, the present, and any possible changes in the future.
We think of preservation as it being in one time, but it was such an eclectic, weird house to begin with. It was always weird, and it was always a pastiche.
Meg also runs a popular Instagram, which I have loved for years, way before meeting her. It's called 80s Deco, and she posts an incredible stream of images of amazing furniture and interiors. Despite its name, it actually features designs from all eras, not just stuff made in the 80s. Look at these lamps that were designed in 2021 by Julie Lansom. So what makes these objects fit into the category of 80s Deco?
You look at all these old 80s magazines, they're still coming out of the 60s and 70s, and they're still classics. And I think I didn't realize how old like the Thonet chairs were, all the different curly bent wood. I didn't even know it was from like the 1870s or something when it was first started. But then you take that and you paint it red, and it looks so contemporary.
Meg also runs a gallery called Hammy Wammy that people rent for photo shoots.
Welcome to Hammy Wammy.
It's here that all this 80s stuff she's collected over the years can really come together. This place doesn't have to do all the pesky things that a house has to do.
I had all this weird furniture, so we were like, I had some in storage, and then we cleaned out the basement, was gonna move it to the basement. We're like, well, why don't we have a storage space studio art gallery.
Of course, it is house-like things like a fireplace, but that's more for show. It reminds me of the Beetlejuice house after the renovation, which I've also talked about as maybe one of the most important things that got me into architecture.
I like layering, and I think people shouldn't be scared to put chairs in front of bookshelves. And I don't know, I'm a maximalist, but I still like everything exactly in its place. Like, very particular maximalist.
History isn't linear, it's cyclical. What was once avant-garde becomes mainstream, then outdated, only to be rediscovered and appreciated again, or for new reasons. In the 80s, a lot of popular designed objects and buildings challenged conventional norms and redefined design paradigms. And now that we're 40 years removed, we have the difficult task of parsing the best way of moving forward while keeping enough of the past to learn our lessons. Sometimes that means keeping things that look a little strange in their new contemporary habitat. The Thompson Center, the Memphis Group, aren't just bold for the sake of it. They're reimagining the world and questioning the status quo. They're about finding beauty in the mundane and celebrating the overlooked. The extravagance of the 80s is not just about neon colors, geometric patterns, or iconic buildings. It's about a mindset that changed, innovated, and redefined. These values should always have a place, even though they challenge you to like it and appreciate it. Here's a photo of me in 1980. That's way before I could grow this silly mustache, but when I need my face to be that smooth again, I turn to Henson shaving. I can't believe how much I love my razor, which is made in Henson's aerospace machine shop in Canada. This thing is absolutely incredible, and it's made by craftspeople in a family-run business that makes parts for the ISS, Mars rover, and satellites. They've taken that expertise and aimed it at crafting the perfect razor. Through their research, they've found that the way that the razor blade is supported is crucial to the smoothness of its operation. The flexible blade, if it's left too exposed, can result in chatter, causing nicks and cuts and irritation. So Henson machines their razors out of aluminum with incredibly tight tolerances befitting their aerospace heritage. This allows them to expose the minimum amount of actual blade, just 27 microns. The blade then ends up being supported along its entire length, eliminating chatter and eliminating the problems that plague most razors. As soon as you just touch the thing, it feels like something that could have been an integral part of the space station or something. It also has other clever engineering features like the channels that help easily remove hair and cream. And it can also use normal razor blades that just cost like 5 cents and are recyclable, making the razor a great investment in a high-quality, earth-friendly, personal item that makes you feel like you're an astronaut every time that you shave. So use the link below, pick out your favorite razor, and then add 100 pack of blades and use my code StuartHicks, one word, to get those blades for free with your purchase. Start getting that high-quality shave that you've been wanting today.